Hello, friends. Happy Friday. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. In just a moment, we're going to be chatting with Carmen Vitali. Stick around for that conversation. Really great convo today. We're going to be breaking down a bunch of things in the NFC North, including the future of Sam Darnold in Minnesota. We're going to be talking about the basically NFC championship regular season game, the Vikings-Lions game that decides the number one seed in the playoffs. And then we're also going to, of course, break down Packers-Bears, talk about why this Packers defense should continue to get better, talk about a little bit of everything. So there's a lot in there. You're going to want to check it out. And of course, Carmen always does a phenomenal job. So stick around for that in just a moment. Before we get there, shout out to our brand new Pack a Day Podcast YouTube members, Zach Hetzer, Matt Williams, and Spree for All. Also, brand new All-Pro member, Izzy Roberts. Thank you all so much for signing up. Appreciate that a ton. If you haven't checked out memberships yet, make sure to do so. We will be back soon with members-only Q&As and Aaron Nagler and I chatting and things like that. My apologies. Still not 100%. This thing is absolutely insane. I know you're hearing all about the stuff that's going around, the norovirus, the colds, the flus, the everything. Just as much as you can, take your vitamins, stay healthy. This thing, it's not fun. So try to stay healthy. And I know there's worse stuff going around even than what I had. So stay healthy out there, stay vigilant. It's not a fun thing to have, and it just does not like to go away in any way, shape, or form. But I will get back to doing all of our happy hours, Q&As, and all of that stuff very, very soon. My apologies for missing all of it. Trust me, it hurts me a lot more than it hurts you guys, because I would love to be doing it. But alas, here we are. There's only so much you can do when you're not feeling 100%. So like I said, I'll get back to that sooner rather than later. But thank you again to all of you for signing up to become brand new Pack a Day Podcast YouTube members. Let's get to the Packers-Bears injury report presented by Habish and Rotier. Packers, exactly the same. Did not practice. Jaire Alexander, Zane Anderson, Brenton Cox, Andre Dillard, Quay Walker, Christian Watson, and Evan Williams. My guess is those guys are all out. It's Thursday, right? As they practiced. It's a game week where there's not a lot on the line. You have to be healthy basically in order to play, meaning they're not going to take any chances. I would be maybe if an Andre Dillard, or maybe if, I guess Dillard's probably the one, right? If Dillard gets back from concussion protocol on time, maybe, and same thing, I guess, for Zane Anderson. But if there's any semblance of anything there, I think they're just done for this week. So my guess is Jaire, well, we know Jaire, but Zane Anderson, Brenton Cox, Andre Dillard, Quay Walker, Christian Watson, and Evan Williams probably just not playing this week. Then you get to the limited group, Chris Brooks, Javon Bullard, Josh Jacobs, Elton Jenkins, Tucker Kraft. That's going to be more interesting. You can't sit out everybody, right? Like as Matt LaFleur mentioned, you do have to have enough players to play in this game, but we'll be interested to see how many of those guys play. And then Devontae Wyatt practiced in full again, but it seems like potentially still in concussion protocol as well. So we're going to have to kind of monitor this. Green Bay might be a little bit shorthanded going into this game, depending on how many players they want to call up. My guess is Jaire goes on IR. They get another roster spot that way, but it's going to be a little bit tight with how they kind of put together the roster for this week if they do want to keep a lot of these guys healthy and not put them in harm's way. For the Bears, Elijah Hicks, Travis Homer, Tevin Jenkins were all still did not participate due to injuries. Rome Odunze was still out via illness. Scott Daly was did not practice due to a personal reason. Kyler Gordon was new due to an illness, and Mercedes Lewis was out with just a vet rest day, which is normal for him. Travarius Moore was still a full participant, and then Larry Borum went from a did not participate to a full participant with his illness. So he's coming back from that illness. Again, even on NFL injury reports, you can see all these illnesses going around. So just like I said, be careful out there. Just like the Packers know how to bounce back from tough hits. If you've been hit with an injury after an accident, the team of highly skilled attorneys at Habish and Rotier can help you receive the right compensation to help you bounce back from your injury. Habish has been successfully resolving claims for over 90 years, and their attorneys have the experience and expertise to get you back in the game. When you call Habish, you're going to talk to a lawyer directly. It's my favorite part. Their number is 800-242-2874 or 800-2HABISH. You can also visit their website at habish.com. Habish Rotier, national reputation, hometown service. It's a beautiful blend. Make sure to check them out. Again, habish.com. As we talked about with playing time, Josh Jacobs gave a little bit of insight into that. Josh Jacobs basically said he didn't think he was going to get a lot of carries in this game. Now, whether that means he doesn't play or whether it means he starts and maybe gets a handful of carries and then they shut him down, we're going to have to wait and see. But per Josh Jacobs, don't expect a heavy workload. Thankfully, fantasy season is over. We don't have to really worry about that. But if you're getting in on some daily fantasy sports action, maybe stick away from Josh Jacobs in this one. As far as the Pro Bowl, we got to learn the Packers that were selected to the Pro Bowl games. Xavier McKinney, Josh Jacobs, both selected. Not surprised for either of those. Those were expected. And then Rashawn Gary was selected. Certainly a little bit more surprising. I think most people would argue it's been a little bit more of a down year for Rashawn Gary, although he has improved as a run defender pretty significantly. This was very much due to his peers and the coaches that voted for Rashawn. And then top alternate was Elton Jenkins. So we'll see if Elton gets the opportunity to go there as well, dependent upon how some other stuff shakes out. The one surprising one is Zach Tom was not even an alternate in any capacity. And here's my overall take on this. I could not care less. I could not care less for all the things that you guys know I love to nerd out about and look at the minutia and the details and what it matters. There is nothing that I could possibly care less about than who was selected to the Pro Bowl or why. Were they deserving? Were they not deserving? Discuss amongst yourselves. Have fun with it. I could not care less. I still remember to this day, the one time I've ever been stumped on a radio show when I was a guest on a radio show or anything where I just didn't know how to respond is I was on a radio show. I think it was the day after the Pro Bowl. I think there was still a Pro Bowl going on at the time. And I got asked about how the Packers played in the Pro Bowl. And I am like, I didn't even know how to respond because like there was no chance that thing was going on in my house, that I was watching it or paying attention to it whatsoever. So I had no idea how to respond to it. I'm like, yeah, they guys played well or so. I didn't even know how to go about talking about it. I should have just said, yeah, I didn't watch a single second of it, nor do I care. But I was still kind of a little bit newer at the time and didn't want to go in that direction. So that's still the only time. I just do not care. And especially now that it's Pro Bowl games, by all means, enjoy it away. For those of you who enjoy it, get after it. Like, no, that's fine. I'm not judging anyone, but I just could not care less about who's selected to the Pro Bowl games to play dodgeball and flag football and doesn't matter. Now, I do know it matters for incentives and things of that nature. So, which is silly, by the way, especially when fan voting goes into that equation, but that's a story for another day. I just don't care. Kudos to McKinney, Jacobs, and Gary for getting selected. I know it's still a bit of an honor, but it just could not register any less on my radar for anything like that. But kudos to those guys for getting selected. With that, let's get to our great conversation with the one and only Carmen Vitali. We are joined once again by the great Carmen Vitali. You can find her on Twitter at CarmyV, of course, on her Fox Sports podcast. You can find her as a reporter on Fox Sports covering all things NFL. Just today, she was on the Kay Adams show. So she's everywhere, but she's taking some time with us today, and we always appreciate it. Carmen, how the heck are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm glad that you're feeling up to doing the show at least, and I'm also trying to stave off being sick. So this is a great time of year.
I think everyone's either fighting it off that they have it or just trying to say that they don't have it. They're doing everything they can to stave it off, like you said, but hopefully you can avoid it. It is not fun, but what is fun is getting to chat some Packers and some NFC North football. And so let's do that and let's get started right away. I want to start by taking a look back. I haven't even had a huge opportunity to discuss Packers Vikings, quite frankly, all that much because I've been out, but I want to get your thoughts first. A huge win for Minnesota. Obviously they stay alive in not only the NFC North race, but the potential to get the number 1 overall seed. Green Bay fights back at the end, but cannot find a way to a victory. Again, their 5th time that they've had a quality opponent to play and haven't found a way to come up with that victory. Your takeaways from this Vikings victory over the Green Bay Packers?
Yeah, well, there's also things to consider about, the other side of this where Minnesota had every reason to win this game, to stay in the race with the Lions for the number 1 seed, for the division crown. That was not something that was on the table for the Green Bay Packers. And I'm not saying that necessarily changes the math on things, but sometimes it does. And when you're kind of playing a little bit more conservatively, trying to not get guys hurt and stuff because you've already locked up the playoff spot, and that's pretty much, there's some seeding implications, but for the most part, you know what to expect come the postseason. I think that does change the math a little bit. And I've seen, a little bit of Packers Twitter just kind of coming down on the team for, not being able to finish these games against these quality opponents. But you have to consider that these are 2 of the best teams in the league. And the Packers have been able to hang in there with them, whether that's too little, too late. I feel that. And on the NFL on Fox podcast this week, Dave Hellman and I talked about not procrastinating if you're the Green Bay Packers, making New Year's resolutions not to procrastinate when you're playing specifically your division opponents. But outside of that, I mean, I know they lost to the Eagles in the first game of the season, but even then, that could have gone the other way very easily. There was a slippery field in Brazil. It's the first game. I really don't see all of these alarm bells that I think some Packers fans are seeing with the Green Bay Packers at all. And I do think that the defense has gotten better towards the end of the season as far as the pressure that they're able to generate. They're still fourth in takeaways on the season. And then you see Jordan Love. I mean, he didn't have the benefit of Christian Watson, who stretches the field vertically in this game. And that does factor into stuff like that. But then you have Josh Jacobs to lean on. And I don't see a whole lot wrong with this team or any reason why they can't, in the end, contend, even with not being able to finish some of these games. And I get that being frustrating, but I'm not worried about it.
Well, I appreciate that. And maybe you're going to be able to talk me off the ledge a little bit. This, to me, the Vikings game was the first one that I don't know if it was an alarm bell or a red flag or was just a level of disappointment, because I was kind of there with you. And I still very clearly think that this is a good team capable of beating anyone. I think if you're Philly, you have to be disgusted with the fact that if this does happen the way that it does, that you have to face Green Bay in a opening round when you're the number 2 seed and you get that matchup. Right. That's not ideal. But I looked at that Philly game and you look at that and you say, all right, slippery field, first game of the season. You're going down to Brazil. Nobody plays the preseason anymore. Like, it's everything wonky happens in week 1. All right. Like, a lot of accident forgiveness with that one. The Vikings game, you're down 28-0. They fight back. Jordan clearly wasn't himself. The first Lions game, Jordan clearly wasn't himself. You can start explaining those away a little bit. The Lions game could have gone either way, and it felt like whoever got the ball last was going to win that game. And it just so happened that the Lions got the ball last and they won the game. And then you get to this Vikings game and you're like, all right, can you finally see some proof and some evidence that they can go into a opponent's stadium, a really good opponent, and come away with a victory? I think that the tough thing for me was, to your point of, kind of playing with your food early and procrastinating, if you will. They once again followed the same formula that got them those losses in the previous game, is starting off so incredibly slow and not playing their best football right away and having to claw their way back where they get close again. You're like, oh, this team is right there, but they just haven't been able to overcome. And again, I think they can beat anyone, but now they have obviously this very tough task where it's likely at Philly, at Minnesota or Detroit, and then probably at Minnesota or Detroit in the final game if they do want to make some noise here. But I do appreciate the fact that I do think this is still a very good football team.
Yeah, and it's a luck of the draw that they are in a division with these other two teams that they're going to have to go against. They're not going to see they haven't seen the last of their division teams either. If they do, go at any distance in the playoffs, the matchups in this conference are tough, and sometimes that's just the way it is. And I do think that they're capable of beating any team in a one-off scenario, and I still think that. But I get, to some extent, the Packers fans being weary and really being concerned that they didn't pull off this win against Minnesota. You had every reason to want to do that, just from a pride standpoint, from the division standpoint, all that kind of stuff. But I do think that when there was so much more on the line for Minnesota, that has to play into this, and you have to take that kind of stuff into account. Whereas in the grand scheme of things, was this really going to affect the Green Bay Packers? And I think the short answer is not very much, or very minimally. Like I said, seeding implications, sure, but it's going to be a dogfight either way you slice it. And I do think that they've come together again. Like I mentioned before, the defense has come a long way when you talk about pressure numbers. And if you're going off the PFF numbers that I've been looking at all season long, specifically, there's been drastic jumps in how much pressure Green Bay is getting. I have their numbers from weeks 1 through 9, 22 sacks. That's tied for 13th in the league. 33.1% pressure rate. That ranked 19th. Weeks 11 through 18 after Green Bay's bye, 23 sacks, but that's tied for second behind only the Broncos. 37.8% pressure rate. That rate's 6th. And the third most total pressures behind only the Broncos and Chiefs in that span. So again, those are PFF's numbers. They vary actually kind of drastically from what you've seen from like NGS or Sport Radar, but it still stands to reason that this is a very improved unit. It's only the first year under Jeff Hafley. It was a complete scheme overhaul. That takes time. And again, we've talked about how fluid these schemes are these days, but it still matters when you're talking about a team that was built for a 3-4 defense and guys trying to figure out, where they fit in and what roles that they excel at and how all those puzzle pieces fit together. And then on top of that, you're dealing with defensive injuries. So you talk about Jaire Alexander hasn't been available for most of the year. Even stuff like Quay Walker not being available for this last game, or Evan Williams being in and out of the lineup, Javon Bullard working through some certain things. All of that stuff compounds, and especially when you're not used to playing in the scheme that you're executing this year because it's only the first year. So I really just want to caution against doom and gloom. Like the calls for Matt LaFleur's job, I think, are absolutely asinine.
Crazy,
He's done an incredible job with just, if you look at the offense, the play calling, the diversification of the run game after the bye, especially the adjustments he's able to make. The fact that the Packers are able to claw their way back into these games after halftime is a testament to Matt LaFleur's adjustments and that ability that he has, that there are a lot of coaches that don't have that. So I want to talk people off the ledge. Even if this isn't a year that the Green Bay Packers make the Super Bowl, I still think that there's so much to be encouraged about with this team because they're so young, still the youngest team in the league, and they have such a bright future ahead of them with all of these players that are extremely productive at this stage of the game.
That I 1,000,000% agree with. And I do think that this future is incredibly bright. And I do think that they're just getting started, still the youngest team in the league. And again, maybe even if this isn't the 2024, 2025, team that, ultimately reaches the pinnacle, this window is still wide open for this really young team. And one of the things that you talked about last year with Brian Flores was how it took players time to adjust to that defense. And I think what we really saw this year is once their GM had the opportunity to go and get players that specifically fit that Brian Flores defense, like a Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel and those type of players.
Blake Cashman, all those guys.
Now all of a sudden you have these players that were brought in specifically for that system, and you see it just kind of humming on all cylinders. Well, it is not a bystander chance, in my opinion, that the guys that are playing best in this system that seem to be perfect fits, Evan Williams, Xavier McKinney, Edgerrin Cooper, guys that were brought in to this team this season to fit exactly in this scheme, right? Whereas everyone else, like you said, is transitioning over from a previous scheme into this one, which A, takes time, and now B, you're going to have another offseason where Goody's going to be able to go through the draft and free agency to specifically find guys that fit Jeff Hafley's style of defense and make it even better. Meanwhile, all the guys that made this transition this year are going to be a year further along because they've done it for a season. So I do think that there are, despite even the fact that there's already been this drastic increase in overall, defensive improvement going from Joe Barry to Jeff Hafley, I think there's a whole nother level that's out there next year once they even add some more pieces that fit this Jeff Hafley defense more perfectly.
Yeah, you saw that in Minnesota too. I mean, the Vikings defense this year is light years ahead of where it was last year. And last year, it garnered a lot of, buzz, and you saw kind of the capabilities and what the ceiling could be for the Minnesota Vikings defense. And then I think this year is when that was really realized and where you really do see the full capability of this scheme now that Brian Flores has had his hands in it for more than one season. So that I try to preach patience. I know it's hard, especially when you see other teams in your division that are killing it. But like the Lions, this was not an overnight success. Nope. Same thing with honestly, I'm going to write about this over the next week or so. The competitive rebuild that they've done in Minnesota, that was something that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, their general manager, talked about, how they weren't going to tear everything down. Even when they lost Kirk Cousins, it was like, we're doing this competitive rebuild. And you're like, what does that even mean? Like, there's like, that's not a thing. Well, turns out it is a thing. Yeah. And it takes a little bit of time, and you can only make so many improvements to your roster under the cap constraints and just availability and all of that kind of stuff in one off season. And so when you build on that though, and you have a long-term plan, that's where you see these teams pull away. And Green Bay absolutely has that. They've always had that. They have that almost more, and they can operate in ways that other teams can't, given their unique structure and the market and all that other stuff. Green Bay just can continually stay relevant because of the way that they're able to build their team, which is different than most other teams. It just, sometimes there's down years. And if a down year is an 11-12 win season and you're in the playoffs and you still have a shot at the dance, like, give me that all day, every day, as someone who grew up in Chicago, please.
We're spoiled, Carmen, and there's no two ways around it.
Yeah.
And
that's what I was getting at. Thanks for saying
the 7th seed. We don't like finishing third. We don't like, certainly the Vikings and Lions finishing ahead of the Packers. We are spoiled. We understand it. But no, I'm very much with you in everything that you said. Obviously, one of the things that does hurt Green Bay and their playoff chances moving forward is, like you mentioned, the Jaire Alexander injury. He is out for the season. There's maybe a small chance he could be back for a Super Bowl run if Green Bay does make it that far. But in your estimation, what type of impact does this have on the Packers and their playoff chances?
I mean, unfortunately, I know that, Jaire played in both playoff games last year. He had that interception against Dallas. Didn't do a whole lot in that game against San Francisco, though played 98% of the team's snaps. The Packers have had to learn to live without Jaire for the better part of these last 2 seasons. He's played only in 16 of the last 36 possible games, including the playoffs. As good of a player as he is, I just don't really think it has that much of a bearing when Green Bay has had to get by without him. Now, would you like to have him for the playoffs? Absolutely. Of course you would. Like I said, he's still a very, very good player. But to take it back to a really old coaching adage, is your best ability is availability. And so far, Jaire Alexander, for one reason or the other, hasn't had much of that over the last 2 seasons, especially. So I think, honestly, the injuries that you're really looking at are like Quay Walker's injury in the middle of that defense, or, trying to get Evan Williams back and all that other stuff. Like, that's the kind of stuff that compounds a guy like Jaire being out. But like I said, I think I mentioned this earlier, the Packers are still 4th in takeaways. That secondary is doing well. You have the resurgent, or the surge of Edgerrin Cooper just really coming into his own as a rookie at the linebacker level, which is just incredible. Drafting, evaluation, all the testament to Goody there for him. And then you have Xavier McKinney, who is really the leader of that. And I think that this would be a lot bigger of an issue if you didn't have a veteran like Xavier McKinney, because I think that's where Jaire kind of comes in. He's the vet. He's the guy that's been there before. Younger players look to him to kind of lead them. You have that in Xavier McKinney. So again, I think that mitigates the impact that an absence by Jaire Alexander can make.
And going back to something you said earlier, this is to me where that pass rush becomes paramount. We saw at times when it struggled against Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold was able to sit back there. And especially when you've got wide receivers like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, they're going to get open eventually, and he's going to find outlets, and he did. And when there was pressure, it obviously looked very good, and it looked like that secondary could hold up. And there were a lot of times where it took Sam Darnold to his 3rd, 4th, even 5th read to get the ball out, but it was just unfortunate that he had time to get to his 3rd, 4th, 5th read. The secondary held up initially, made Sam Darnold hold the ball to the point where maybe you could get a pressure on him, but the defense just couldn't get there. So this pressure and getting there is going to be paramount to Green Bay's success in the playoffs, with especially Jaire Alexander being out. Now, going into this final week of the season, and even just going back to last week as well, we're starting to see teams have the decisions to make in certain scenarios as to whether or not they should play their starters or not. Dan Campbell had that decision with the Lions last week as to whether or not he should play his guys. He decided to. Matt LaFleur has that decision this week to whether or not he should play his guys. He is apparently deciding to. In your opinion, is that the right? It clearly seemed to be the right move for Detroit. Is that the right move for Green Bay as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably have a bad taste in your mouth from that Vikings game. Obviously, you dropped that one and you didn't want to, and you want to see if you can get out to a fast start in Chicago. I mean, the thing is, Chicago, at that game, that first game in Soldier Field, that was not a walk in the park for the Green Bay Packers. Right. And so I think you want to prove to yourself that you can do it and kind of go into the postseason with that momentum. And that's a very real thing that coaches consider. And I do think that, just working out some kinks as much as possible, just kind of reminding yourself what you're capable of all of those things can happen. And, it's at home too, playing in front of your home crowd, especially given the fact that you're likely not going to get a home game in the playoffs, barring something crazy happening. So this is, I think, something in a scenario where, if there's a guy that's on the fritz with an injury or needs some rest or all that other stuff, absolutely keep him out. But I really don't see a whole lot of downside to playing a game that the Bears are going to be taking seriously too. So I think that this is an opportunity to go into the postseason on the right foot for the Green Bay Packers. And I think Matt LaFleur will see it that way too.
I think so too. I trust Matt's decision to have the pulse of the team and what's left. And I think this is it's one of those darn if you do, darn if you don't. If you get a player hurt, everyone's going to second guess it. If you don't play guys and you come out slow in the first round, everyone of the playoffs, everyone's going to second guess it. So you just got to go with what your feel is. And I feel like, all right, I'm cool with this and I'm not going to second guess it because he feels like this is what's best for the team. So that works. That's good enough for me in this instance. I want to quickly take a preview and just kind of a quick look ahead to some potential offseason questions. We're not quite there yet, obviously, but there's already some interesting ones brewing. I want to start in Minnesota. Man, this question has evolved over time, and it's now getting undeniable of what to do with Sam Darnold. You have J.J. McCarthy in waiting, this rookie quarterback who is progressing to look like he was going to eventually be the starter, maybe even this year at some point, through the injured for the year. Darnold takes over, has an unbelievable season, is the unquestioned guy. Like, you saw the celebration with the team after the game. Like, they love this dude. How do you navigate this if you're Minnesota? Is this a franchise tag for Darnold and then still continue to develop McCarthy? Is this give Darnold the huge contract and see if you can get maybe even maybe the top pick back for McCarthy? Like, how this is a very interesting situation for Minnesota.
It really is. I do not envy Kwesi at all in trying to figure out what to do here. And I do think that what really matters, and it's not an answer that we're going to get, is how Minnesota views Sam Darnold internally. And are they as impressed with Sam Darnold as we are from the outside? Because clearly, yes, everything he's doing is so impressive. And seeing that video of him being on the shoulders of his teammates and then playing Many Men by 50 Cent, like, that is the first time I think I really questioned whether they were going to let him walk out of the building. Up until that point, I was like, barring a Super Bowl run, I just don't know how you don't, how you keep him when you have JJ McCarthy, and this has been the plan the whole time. And also, you have all the faith in the world in Kevin O'Connell to be able to develop JJ McCarthy. That was the original plan. You were going to give Sam Darnold a long leash. That's why you paid him $10 million in the first place. You expected him to be serviceable for a long period of time this season. It just so happened it was the whole season. And it just so happened that he surpassed any and all expectations. But if you have faith in Kevin O'Connell, you already sunk the first round pick into JJ McCarthy, then you trust your process, right? But if Sam Darnold leads you to the Super Bowl and he does have the locker room like that, then if you think that this is viable and you are as impressed with him internally as we are externally, then you look at JJ McCarthy, and this year you're going to benefit from this quarterback class not being seen, or very highly touted, not being seen as one of the best, certainly not on par with what we saw last year. And if you think, all right, well, if JJ McCarthy was coming out this year, where does he fall? And I think he's quarterback one. Agreed. So then does that up his value? Are you able to recoup a first round pick for him? And if that's the case, and you have faith in the longevity of Sam Darnold and him continuing at this pace under Kevin O'Connell with all of this offensive talent around him, yada, 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 you still probably can get him because of the it's only been 1 year. You can still probably get him. You're not going to have to pay $50-60 million for him. You're probably going to get him around the $40 million a year mark, maybe 40 to 50, something like that. Work out something like that, especially if Sam Darnold himself is self-aware enough to know that Kevin O'Connell is a big part of his success and he wants to stay in Minnesota, then I think that there's something that can be done there. But I really do think that the Minnesota Vikings are going to try to trust their process, again, barring the Minnesota Vikings making the Super Bowl. And then I think you really have to reassess.
Can you imagine? This is my nightmare as a Packers fan. They bring back Darnold. They're able to get one of the top picks in return for JJ McCarthy. Can you imagine Travis Hunter in this defense, and then also being able to utilize him with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison sporadically on offense, and Travis Hunter as your number 3 wide receiver?
I mean, if I'm a Green Bay fan, I'm scared of that.
That
But
is
honestly,
ridiculous.
as an NFL fan, I want that so badly. I want to see Travis Hunter in this scheme for Brian Flores, and I want to see what Kevin O'Connell could cook up. But I think the only scarier scenario is if he ends up in current Detroit, which I don't think is going to be the case next
Right.
year. But like if you lose Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson and all that, but like Travis Hunter in current Detroit land,
Yeah.
just that would be wild. But
Nuclear.
that doesn't seem to
that,
be something that's on the table for the Lions.
either of those would be a nightmare scenario right now. So hopefully it doesn't get to that. But that would be a very scary thing in the NFC North. And then from a Bears standpoint, obviously they're going to have a massive offseason coming up and how they attack this. What's job number one for Chicago? New head coach, and then attacking the draft. Like, how do you see this going in Chicago?
I think first you need to take a long look at what your intentions are with Ryan Poles, because I don't think that he's coached, or I don't think that he's GM'd himself out of a job. I think he deserves to keep his job because I think that he has done some good things in the way that he set them up long term and all of that kind of stuff. The question mark, though, is there is now a different structure internally in Chicago than Ryan Poles was hired under. He did not have a team president over him. Kevin Warren was not hired when Ryan Poles was hired. So now that Kevin Warren is in charge of football and the business side while trying to build a stadium on top of trying to rebuild this team, does Ryan Poles, like, I don't know their relationship. Like we've seen them in press conferences. I've seen them in press conferences. I don't know what it's like behind closed doors. If it's a good working relationship, then sure, you keep Ryan Poles, you let him, do this draft, you let him be part of, hire the next head coach. But if there's any doubt in your mind that you want Ryan Poles for the long term, you need to get rid of him. You need to do what you should have done with Matt Eberflus last year, because when they retained Matt Eberflus, I said, then you're retaining him for 2 years. I don't want to see you get rid of him this year and perpetuate the same cycle that you've been doing. What did they do? They did that.
Yep.
And yeah, did Matt Eberflus do enough to coach himself out of a job last offseason? No, probably not. But you have to think longer than that. And so again, that's the first order of business, is figuring out if Ryan Poles is part of the long-term future of this franchise. If he is, then yeah, you go and you find a head coach that is a culture builder, has a Rolodex of some sort, or is Ben Johnson and just an insane offensive mind, and you give him a blank check and say, fill in the number, dude, because that's what it's going to take to get him. He'll be the hottest head coaching candidate should he actually choose to leave Detroit, which I still think is an if. You have to figure out you have to think long-term if you're the Chicago Bears, because that's not what they've been doing for the majority of my life.
Well, what too, if Ben Johnson says, yep, I want to go to Chicago, but I want my own GM. I want to be able to pick, like, because if you make your promises to Ryan Poles and you're set there, and then you can get Ben Johnson, but Ben Johnson says only if I can bring this, front office personnel guy X with me, like, then, like, I don't know how that goes too. Like, these are things that I think they're going to, like, if you're a Bears fan, you hope that they have dotted their I's and crossed their T's and thought about before they get into these situations. But yeah, otherwise you end up in the same sort of cycle where now all of a sudden you go into this season, you get your new head coach, but next season you're firing Ryan Poles, and it's just getting same cycle over and over again.
The thing that can save you if you're the Chicago Bears, though, is that teams that have both of these positions open, head coach and GM, are teams like, the New York Jets. And does Ben Johnson want to go to the New York Jets? No.
Nobody
should. That's nobody should. Exactly. But like, you have a good roster, you have talent on this roster, you have Caleb Williams in Chicago. That's a selling point.
Yeah.
And then you also have, so like, you can't necessarily be that picky if you're Ben Johnson. Yep. I realize he can ask for the moon, and that's totally fine. But if you want control over who gets in that position, or if you want some of that control yourself, who knows? There are very limited teams that are going to allow you to do that, or B, even have the availability for that. So that's one thing to consider. And what I think does save the Bears they have talent, they have resources in that building, but it's just the structure of everything, I think, is the biggest question mark when you're talking about bringing in a guy that knows better, especially. So like, Ben Johnson knows better because he's seen it with Dan Campbell, but like Vrabel, Pete Carroll, those guys have a long track record in this league of doing things a certain way, and they know, and they've been a head coach. So like, are they really that desperate? And maybe in the case of Pete Carroll, he really wants to get back in. He would take that. But I think a lot of guys that know better are very, very weary about that situation, how it all works and how much red tape there is and all of that.
Yeah, that's really well said. I'm really interested to see what Chicago does. If the Bears somehow beat the Packers this week, do they do the Gatorade bath for Thomas Brown, knowing that he's getting like nuked the next morning because it's this first win as a coach? Like, can you do a Gatorade bath? You think he does?
And it would be against the Green Bay Packers. It would be something that Matt Eberflus was not able to do. Like all of this kind of stuff. I don't know. I think maybe you just give him that moment.
I think but like is it, like, I don't know what you do in that situation. Like, everyone's getting probably fired the next morning, but yeah, I don't know.
I would say clearly the Bears aren't really concerned with optics. I mean, look at how they fired Matt Eberflus. They sent him out there and fired him 2 hours later. So like, if you were really that concerned with optics, you would have, I've been on record ranting about start the meeting earlier. It's really not that hard, guys. Figure that out before when he's going out there. Just figure it out before then.
The classic would be is if he gets the Gatorade bath and then gets back in the locker room and they hand him his walking papers as he's still covered in orange Gatorade or something. That would be very on brand. All right, just really quick. Let's start with Vikings and Lions. Who wins this one? Who wins the division? Who gets the 1 seed?
I have no idea, Andy. Like, just absolutely none whatsoever. This is going to be an absolute dogfight. And with it as beat up as Detroit, it's such a catch-22 for Detroit because they're so beat up, right? And that's the reason you need that first round bye. But to get there, you're going to have to go through the toughest team you possibly could. Yep. And it's going to be really, really difficult because if you allow Minnesota to score that many points, it's going to be hard to put up that many points on them. So it's one of those things. I have no idea. It's an absolute toss-up. Both of these teams are incredibly good. They're incredibly for real. They are Super Bowl contenders. And it's going to come down, I guess, to who makes the least amount of mistakes, which you have to think is going to be Minnesota because Detroit's playing guys off the street at this point. And you'd want to give them grace with those mistakes. I just know that, I mean, Aaron Glenn and his staff have been spending nights in the office. Ben Johnson and his staff already do. And part of the thing I talked to Kay Adams about this morning was just about playing the starters against San Francisco was much more than Dan Campbell just being like, we're tough, we're gritty, we're going to play. It was absolutely intentional, and it's with the purposes of setting up the Minnesota Vikings and presenting certain looks that now Brian Flores has to prepare for and making that job as hard on him as possible. And whether you run those same different kind of looks and you do something different out of them, or you don't even run them at all, you're trying to get the upper hand in any way you can. And so Ben Johnson putting stuff like Penei Sewell at left tackle, shifting over to left tackle or running a jet motion on a fake reverse, that all plays into it because now guess what? If Penei Sewell's out wide, you have no idea what that man is going to do because you've seen him throw a pass. You've seen him try to catch a pass. You've seen him now run a reverse. You've seen him do so many things from that same position. And so now if you're the Minnesota Vikings, you have to prepare for all of those. And you have no idea what that man's about to do, running faster than anybody at 300 pounds has any right to. It's just like, you can't do this stuff unless you have a Penei Sewell, but lucky for the Lions, they do. And I just think it's so interesting, the chess match that goes into all of this and how that game against San Francisco, I think there were probably more plays in there than usual that had nothing to do with the 49ers and everything to do with the Vikings or future playoff opponents.
Yeah, it's going to be a heck of a heavyweight fight. I'm excited for it on Sunday Night Football. Wish it was two different teams, but alas, here we are, and should be a really fun one nonetheless. And then last but not least, Packers, Bears. What are you looking for in this one? What's your expectation?
Yeah, I'm looking to see if the Bears have any pride left. That's really what this comes down to, is because this is a rivalry that runs deep despite how lopsided it's been. And again, the last matchup with these two teams at Soldier Field, Green Bay escaped with the win. It was not in dominating fashion. So I really want to see Bears players right now have, you're evaluating who wants to be there, who's going to be part of this organization next year, if you can get out of those certain contracts, or what you really need. And you're just looking at Caleb Williams, who you think is your future starter. And I still believe that this is a place that he is going to play for a long time. And that's the intent. So you want to see how he kind of reacts to that, get him as much experience and exposure to that as possible. So I just want to see how much fight the Bears have left. Again, it doesn't, there's seeding implications, but it doesn't mean as much for the Green Bay Packers. But I do think that there's still pride on the line. They like being able to say they own the Chicago Bears. I know that, that, everybody knows that.
Yep.
So to sweep them again and to extend the win streak against them, that's all on the line. And Matt LaFleur has never lost to the Chicago Bears, and they want to keep it that way.
12 in a row it would be if Green Bay wins this game. I'm sure they want to win it. I'm sure they'd love to get out to that early lead, set a tone for going into the playoffs, maybe rest some guys in the second half. We'll see if Green Bay can pull that off, or if Chicago can pull the upset and, like you said, have that pride and find a way to end that win streak. But I'm intrigued by this one. I think Green Bay wins this easily, but crazier things have happened. I'll just say, especially in this rivalry. Sure. I'll say that much. Carmen, anything else you want to plug on the way out? Obviously, we'll be following you on Twitter at Carmen V, but what else you got coming out?
Yeah, Blue Sky too. I just did the preview on the Vikings-Lions game and just how historic the matchup itself is. Like, not only are the stakes really high for the game, but just like in general, it's just a rare game. If you're talking about combined win totals, or the loser is going to be the winningest 5 seed we've ever seen in NFL history, and like all like fun stuff like that. So that's all up on foxsports.com. And then we're moving on to playoff coverage next week. Wild.
It's crazy. I cannot wait for it. It's going to be epic. Packers-Eagles game, if it happens. Week 1 is going to be an unbelievable matchup. So we'll have a ton to talk about next week. Carmen, you're the absolute best. Thanks so much again. Follow her on Twitter at CarmenV and on Blue Sky. You can find me at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. That's going to do it for Carmen and I. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.